The moment the words left her mouth, everything changed. Prince William has apparently gone full scorched earth behind palace doors, and the reason why is a confrontation that nobody saw coming but everybody's now talking about. The whole thing kicked off at a charity showcase for rural development at the Royal Horticultural Hall, which sounds like the most boring place on earth for drama to explode. But that's honestly where it gets interesting, because what was supposed to be a standard Tuesday afternoon engagement, with Princess Anne working her way through a list of dignitaries, turned into the kind of public disrespect that royal protocol supposedly exists to prevent. And the fact that it happened anyway in front of reporters with a photographer perfectly positioned to capture the entire thing is the first thing that should make you go, wait, what? So here's what went down. Princess Anne is standing by the main exhibit, structured navy coat, signature brooch, doing exactly what she's been doing for over 50 years without complaint or scandal. She's looking at a display of local produce. The schedule is tight, everything's moving according to plan. Then Laura Lopes, Camilla's daughter, walks into the hall through a side entrance. Now, here's the first thing that doesn't add up. She wasn't on the official guest list for the main stage. She wasn't supposed to be there, but she moves through the crowd with purpose, stops a few feet behind the Princess Royal, waits for a moment of quiet, and then steps forward. She doesn't bow. She doesn't offer a standard greeting. She speaks in what multiple witnesses describe as a loud, sharp tone and tells Princess Anne that the recent changes to the estate funding were a personal insult to her family. Let's just sit with that for a second. A woman who wasn't on the guest list approaches a senior royal during a state-related function and airs a private family grievance in public. That's not a lapse in judgment. That's not getting emotional in the moment. That's a calculated decision to create a scene. And the way Princess Anne handled it tells you everything about why she's survived in this institution for 5 decades. She didn't turn around immediately. She adjusted her gloves. She stood perfectly still for 3 full seconds while the entire room went silent. Then she turned, face completely controlled, and didn't acknowledge the accusation at all. Instead, she asked if the security team had checked the guest list for the afternoon session. That's it. She didn't engage with the content of what Laura said. She questioned her right to be in the room at all. It was a dismissal so swift and surgical that it probably stung more than any argument could have. Laura, according to people who were there, turned a deep shade of red and stepped closer. She accused Princess Anne of hiding behind protocol. She said the princess was orchestrating the recent audit to specifically target Camilla's family. She claimed everyone knew about secret meetings with the Prince of Wales. Her voice carried across the floor. Reporters in the back scrambled for their notebooks. And here's where the setup becomes undeniable. A freelance photographer had his lens trained on the interaction from the start. The camera shutter sound was audible over the rain hitting the glass roof. Someone made sure this moment would be captured. Now, Princess Anne signaled for her protection officer, who moved through the crowd and firmly asked Laura to relocate to the lobby area. He told her that her presence was no longer appropriate. The entire interaction took less than 2 minutes, but it completely upended the carefully curated atmosphere of the event. The question that started circulating immediately was how Laura got access to the hall in the first place. Security at the entrance was rigorous. She wasn't a primary guest. When staff searched the logs, they found that an invitation had been issued by the local regional director, a man who was a distant acquaintance of Camilla's family. He had been persuaded to add her name to the list at the last possible minute. That regional director was suspended by the evening. The invitation was flagged as a security violation. The palace initiated a full review of all regional access protocols. They wanted to make sure this could never happen again, and they were building a case against the entire network that supported Camilla's family. But here's what really makes the timeline suspicious. Within an hour of the clash, a new question emerged. Where was Camilla during all of this? Her official schedule placed her at a board meeting in the city, but a witness claimed to have seen her car idling 3 blocks away from the hall. The security log confirmed the car had been in the vicinity. It stayed for 15 minutes. It left just as Princess Anne moved to the second booth. That's not a coincidence. That's a signal. It looks like Camilla's branch of the family was testing the institution's resolve, pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable, looking for the breaking point. Prince William heard about the event while he was on a conference call. He ended that call immediately and ordered his chief of staff to secure the raw footage from the photographer. He wanted to see exactly what was said. He wanted to know how far the disrespect went, and from what sources are reporting, he wasn't looking for a diplomatic solution. He was looking for evidence of misconduct. The atmosphere at his office was described as cold. He watched the footage on a large screen. He saw the way Laura stood. He saw the reaction of the crowd, and he apparently decided right then that the time for patience was over. He called the king and told him he was taking control of the disciplinary process. He didn't ask for permission. He gave a briefing on the events and the implications. He stated that he would not tolerate this behavior. The king listened in silence and gave him the authority to do what was necessary. Now Princess Anne left through the main exit, waved to the crowd, walked to her car without a glance at the press. The charity showcase was a success in terms of the actual work, but a disaster in terms of optics. The monarchy had been publicly disrespected. The internal hierarchy had been challenged in the most visible way possible, and the staff at the hall started packing up the displays, nervous because they knew their work was about to be buried under the weight of the scandal. So let's talk about Princess Anne's side of this, because the ride back from the hall is where the strategy really comes into focus. She sat in the back of the official state vehicle, staring straight ahead, hands folded over her purse. She didn't look at her phone. She didn't speak to her aide. She was replaying the confrontation, analyzing the exact timing of the words used against her, dissecting the breach. This is someone who has operated within the framework of royal duty for over 50 years. She's faced down protesters. She's endured decades of intense media scrutiny. She views protocol not as a suggestion, but as the mortar that holds the entire structure of the monarchy together. When she finally spoke, she asked about the status of the regional director who issued the invitation. She wanted to know if he had been notified of his suspension. Her voice was steady, devoid of emotion. The aide confirmed the director had been removed from his post within an hour. Anne nodded and said such failures were unacceptable. She noted that the security of the institution started at the front door. She didn't mention Laura Lopes by name. She referred to the incident only as a breach of decorum. That's a cold, distant way to categorize a direct personal attack, but here's why she didn't shut it down sooner. She could have called for the security officer immediately. She could have used her status to silence the room instantly. Instead, she waited. She allowed the scene to play out. She was gathering intelligence. She was watching to see who in the crowd was aligned with the challenger. When she looked at the list of attendees the aide handed her, she saw the names of 3 local journalists known to be friendly with Camilla's family. They had been standing at the edge of the crowd watching the confrontation with clear interest. Anne realized this wasn't just a tantrum, it was a planned media event. The Princess Royal had been the target of a smear campaign for months. She had been the primary obstacle to Camilla's family's push for greater administrative control. She had blocked their attempts to modify the estate management rules. She had insisted on the rigorous audit that was recently implemented. She was the barrier between their ambitions and the wealth of the crown. On the ride back, a new question formed. Who leaked information about the audit to Camilla's family in the first place? Anne knew the audit was highly classified. Only 4 people were present when it was ordered. She started calculating the timeline and realized the leak had to come from the king's own private office. She made a call to contact in the intelligence services. She asked for a trace on the email traffic related to the estate audit. She wanted to see if the trail led back to the palace. She wasn't going to let this go. She's the defender of the gate, and she was determined to find the traitor. When she arrived at the palace, she saw the light on in Prince William's office. She knew he was working. She knew he was also looking for the leak. She walked into the building past the portraits of ancestors and went straight to her desk. She opened her file on estate management and started cross-referencing signatures on the audit documents. She saw the patterns. Now she saw how Camilla's family had been trying to influence personnel decisions, how they tried to insert their own people into regional boards. It was a slow, creeping occupation of the institution. This wasn't about a cottage or a role. It was about the deliberate capture of the monarchy's power structure. Anne decided she would become the primary investigator. She would gather the evidence of sabotage and present it to the king. She would force him to choose between his marriage and the survival of the crown. She stayed at her desk late into the night, focused, cold, ready. The challenger had made a mistake by attacking the one person who would not back down. Meanwhile, Prince William was in full administrator mode. He entered the briefing room at 6:05, didn't remove his coat, walked to the center of the table and placed his phone on the polished surface. 5 senior aides sat before him, each holding a report on the day's events. He pointed to the screen on the wall and played the raw footage from the horticultural show. The sound of the shutter click was sharp. He let the entire interaction play out without speaking. He watched his aunt. He watched Laura Lopes. When the clip ended, he turned off the projector with a sharp click and asked why a woman who had been barred from official engagement lists was allowed into the hall. He looked at the director of security. The man opened his mouth to explain, but William cut him off. He said he didn't want an explanation. He wanted to know which staff member bypassed the screening protocols. He said the person responsible would be fired before the morning news cycle began. This wasn't just about a security lapse. It was about the command structure. William had spent the last 2 months trying to purge the household of staff loyal to Camilla's family. He realized he was fighting a war on 2 fronts, public perception and internal rot. When an aide tried to explain that the invitation came from a regional branch, William asked if that branch had been warned about the restriction on Camilla's family. The aide nodded. William asked why the warning was ignored. The aide shifted in his chair and said there was pressure from above. William asked for a name. The aide went silent. William picked up a secure folder labeled internal influencers. He had been tracking connections between staff and Camilla's family for weeks. He found the link. The pressure had come from a mid-level manager who was married to a personal assistant in Camilla's household. He closed the folder and told the director of security to remove that manager from the building immediately. He also ordered the personal assistant suspended pending a full investigation. He declared Camilla's household a restricted zone. No one was to move between the offices without his written approval. Within 20 minutes, security officers escorted the manager out. The message was clear. Prince William was no longer the heir waiting for his turn. He was the administrator in charge, purging the house, ensuring every person on the payroll understood where the authority lay. Then another piece of the puzzle emerged. William's team had received reports of a series of calls between Camilla's private phone and a legal firm in the city. The dates aligned with the audit timeline. William suspected Camilla was preparing for a legal battle, trying to protect assets the audit was designed to recover. He asked his chief legal advisor if there was any way to freeze the accounts before the law firm could act. The advisor said it would be difficult because the assets were held in trust technically outside palace control. William looked at the map on the wall and pointed to the properties under review. He said he wanted every single one of those titles checked for secondary liens. The Prince of Wales was in a state of controlled fury. He had spent years watching the institution struggle with scandal, watching the dignity of the crown eroded by personal agendas. He decided he would be the one to stop it. He wasn't looking for compromise. He was looking for a complete restoration of order. He walked to the window, looked out at the city lights, and thought about his children. He thought about the world he was going to leave for them. If the monarchy continued in its current state, it wouldn't last another generation. He had to be the wall that stopped the rot. He told his team that the focus for the next 48 hours would be total containment. No more leaks, no more public confrontations. Anyone who spoke to the press would be dealt with under the strictest terms of their contracts. He called the king. He told him he had handled the situation at the hall. He said he was moving to the next phase of restructuring. The time for hesitation was over. He needed the king's public backing. He needed him to sign a new decree that would effectively remove Camilla's family from all official palace business. The king agreed. He was tired of the noise. He was tired of the fighting. He had seen the footage. He had felt the sting of the disrespect. He was ready to let his son lead. William hung up and told his team the decree would be drafted that night and delivered to Camilla by the next morning. Now let's shift to the other side of this because Laura Lopes was sitting in the living room of the country estate surrounded by half-packed boxes reading the comments on the news reports. The screen flickered with a stream of vitriol. People were calling her names. They were questioning her right to speak. She felt a cold tightness in her chest. She had wanted to stand up for her mother. Instead, she felt like the catalyst for an institutional disaster. The resentment had been building for months. It started when Camilla's office staff were reassigned to the central pool. It grew when the travel budgets were slashed. It became personal when security details were withdrawn from Camilla's private family members. Laura and her siblings had been part of the inner circle for years. Now they were being treated like unwanted visitors. The change was abrupt and painful. Then her brother entered the room. He had been checking the news feeds. He told Laura that their personal bank accounts were under review. The bank had sent a letter asking for verification of all transfers over £5,000. That's a clear sign that the palace's audit had reached their private financial lives. They were being squeezed from every side. They were being targeted for their proximity to Camilla. Laura looked at the boxes. They had been told to vacate the estate offices by the end of the week. They were being erased from the palace map. She thought about the meetings she had attended in those offices. She thought about the influence they had wielded over the estate contracts. It felt like they had been living in a different world, and now the walls of that world were being torn down by Prince William. The question that burned for Laura was why Camilla hadn't protected them. She had expected her mother to use her position to force a compromise. She had expected the king to intervene, but Camilla had been silent. She had moved to her private home. She had become a shadow of herself. Laura wondered if her mother was protecting the crown at the expense of her own children. Then a courier arrived at the door with a package from Camilla's personal lawyer. Inside was a letter of advice. It told them to maintain absolute silence. It warned that any further public actions would result in a total legal severance from the royal estate. This wasn't abandonment. This was a plea for survival. Camilla wasn't sacrificing them. She was trying to keep them out of jail. Prince William had found evidence of systemic irregularities. He was preparing a case that could be sent to criminal authorities. The letter explained that the audit had uncovered a trail of fund transfers that were impossible to explain. Laura read the words and felt the weight of the reality. They had been reckless. They had treated the royal household as a resource rather than an institution. Then another disturbing discovery. Laura tried to call a contact at the third-party firm that managed their private trust accounts. The line was dead. The number had been disconnected. She realized William had gone beyond the palace walls. He had dismantled the security of their private holdings. She walked to the window and looked down the long driveway. She expected to see the security vehicles that had followed them for years. They were gone. The palace had withdrawn their protection. They were officially on their own. They had lived for years under the shield of the royal name. Now that the shield was down, they were just another target for the public and the press. Laura called her mother's private line. It went straight to a generic voicemail. The frustration was immense. She wanted to scream. She wanted to go back to the palace and demand answers. But she knew any move she made would be watched. William had eyes everywhere. He had the power of the throne behind him. She was playing against a man who had the support of the law, the press, and the institution. She was fighting a war she had already lost. She sat in the dim light looking at the boxes, thinking about the life they had led, a life of privilege, access, and security built on the foundations of the monarchy. They had taken it for granted. They had assumed the power would last forever. They had been wrong. The monarchy was moving on without them. The divide was permanent. There was no going back. William was creating a new reality, removing the influences he deemed toxic to the throne, cleaning the house, and Camilla's family were the first ones being swept out the door. Back at Buckingham Palace, a damage control operation was in full swing. An emergency meeting was called for 6 in the morning in a windowless basement room that smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. 3 members of the senior communications team sat at the table, eyes bloodshot, having worked through the night. A large screen displayed a live feed of the social media response. The numbers were grim. Negative engagement had reached 4 million interactions. The palace had lost the narrative. The video of the confrontation had been shared across every major platform, analyzed in slow motion, dubbed into 6 languages. The palace's official channels had remained silent for 12 hours. That silence had been interpreted as weakness. The public was filling the void with their own theories. The damage was spreading. The director of communications walked in and tossed a folder onto the table. It contained a draft of an official statement, a masterpiece of legalistic avoidance. It didn't mention any names. It referred to the incident as a misunderstanding at a public function. It promised a review of event security. It was designed to say absolutely nothing. One of the aides pushed the folder away and told the director the draft wouldn't work. She said the public was past the point of accepting vague excuses. She showed him the latest data. People weren't asking for a review of security. They were asking for an explanation of the family rift. They were demanding to know why Camilla's family was acting with such blatant disregard for Princess Anne. The investigation into who leaked the video took a sharp turn. The palace security team initially suspected a member of the catering staff. They had restricted mobile phone use in the main hall, but someone bypassed the rules. By the end of the meeting, they had their answer. The video wasn't taken by catering staff. It was uploaded by a freelancer hired by a local radio station. That station had been given the access code by the same regional director who invited Laura Lopes. He facilitated the entire incident from start to finish. He wasn't just an acquaintance, he was an accomplice. The radio station had paid £10,000 for the exclusive footage. The money was wired through a shell company. The palace legal team issued a demand for the seizure of the files and prepared a lawsuit against the regional director for breach of contract and willful endangerment of the royal person. They were going to make an example of everyone involved. But the question that lingered was why? Why would a longtime civil servant with a clean record, a quiet man from a small town, take such a massive risk? The palace investigators searched his financial records and found a series of mysterious payments totaling £100,000. When Prince William was briefed on the findings, he realized this wasn't a spontaneous outburst of frustration. It was a contracted hit on the reputation of the royal family. He asked his team to identify the source of the payments. He suspected the money came from the same international portfolio he had uncovered in the previous investigation. Camilla's family wasn't just acting out of anger, they were acting out of financial desperation. William called a press conference for 10 o'clock. He didn't invite the usual royal correspondents. He invited the lead investigative reporters from the national newspapers. He decided the best way to regain control was transparency. He would present the evidence of the orchestrated smear campaign. He would show the public that the confrontation was a setup. He would frame Camilla's family as the attackers, not the victims. The atmosphere in the briefing room was electric. Reporters were used to scripted, boring updates. They were not used to being shown forensic accounting records. William took the stage without a teleprompter, speaking from notes. He laid out the timeline of the event. He showed the connection between the regional director and the payments. He showed the financial link to the shell companies. He was direct. He said the institution was under attack by a coordinated effort to destabilize the monarchy for personal gain. He didn't say the names of the family members. He didn't have to. The reporters knew exactly who he was talking about. He concluded by announcing that a criminal investigation had been opened. He left without taking questions. The narrative shifted. It was no longer a family fight. It was a criminal conspiracy. The public attention fixed on the corruption. The sympathy for Laura Lopes evaporated. The focus was on the financial crimes. William had regained momentum. He had successfully turned the tide. The following Monday, the morning light hit the stone floor of the Privy Council chamber. It was empty except for 2 men standing at opposite ends of a long table. Prince William held a formal decree written on thick cream-colored paper. He slid the document toward the king. The ink was still slightly fresh. The message was simple. It revoked the official status of Camilla's family members effective immediately. No more invitations to state functions. No more funding from the estate accounts. No more association with the royal household in any professional capacity. This wasn't a request. It was an order from the institution to protect its own survival. The king looked at the page. He traced the royal seal with his finger. He signed his name without looking up. He knew this was the end of a personal chapter. He had hoped for a different outcome. He had hoped his family could find a way to coexist, but he saw the evidence on the desk beside him. He saw the proof of the smear campaigns. He saw the financial records that proved his wife's family had turned the monarchy into their private piggy bank. He realized he had been protecting a threat. A messenger had already been dispatched to Camilla's country estate carrying a second copy of the decree. She would receive it by noon. The palace staff waited for her call. They waited for an appeal. They waited for an argument, but the hours ticked past. The afternoon came and went. The phone in the king's office remained silent. Late in the evening, a single courier returned from the country estate. He brought back an empty envelope. Camilla had signed the receipt for the decree. She had offered no comments. She had not requested a meeting. She had accepted the terms of her isolation. It was a final chilling act of compliance that felt more like a retreat into total war. Now a new question hangs over the palace. If Camilla is silent, where is she planning her next move? The security team reported that she had cleared out her remaining personal effects from the main residence. The house was officially stripped of her presence. Prince William stood at the window looking out at the dark courtyard. He had won the house, but he had lost the family. The line was drawn. The battle was over. The monarchy stood alone. The line in the sand has been drawn. And the House of Windsor is forever changed. By revoking the status of Camilla's family, Prince William has effectively ended the era of internal influence and reclaimed the authority of the throne. Yet Camilla's chilling silence suggests this is far from a peaceful conclusion. She has retreated, but the board remains set for a final unseen move. Has the monarchy finally purged its deepest threats, or has it merely pushed them into the shadows? The crown stands alone, but the silence inside the palace speaks volumes.